When you hate a character, stereotypically, people expect you to go on some sort of righteous crusade against them, tearing them down and everything they stand for. I am not here to do that. I'm here to share with all of you the characters I used to detest, but grew to like later on. Not that they redeemed themselves, but because I was able to understand them with greater clarity, leading me to enjoy their presence in their respective games more than I did at first. There are plenty of characters I've changed my mind about, but these 5 are my own biggest changes of heart. I'm ordering these by how strong both my negative and positive thoughts and feelings were about them. Number 5 will be the character I hated the least and just grew to mildly enjoy. Number 1 being the one I hated the most and grew to love. Let's begin, shall we? When you introduce a character into a game after 2 expansions and say, "He's your king, you need to listen to him," you might have some backlash on your hands. Backlash I myself am not immune to. I might not have played World of Warcraft extensively until semi-recently, but I did play sporadically throughout the years, and I must say Varian's reintroduction into the universe wasn't exactly solid. While playing through Wrath of the Lich King, Varian just seemed to show up out of nowhere. He wasn't there in Vanilla, or Burning Crusade, and he didn't even appear in the previous Warcraft titles. When he showed up, well, he came off as a boorish, bloodthirsty Gary Stu, who just burst in like some sort of amazing warrior, and was suddenly good at everything except keeping track of his own son. I had such a distaste for him that I had a bit of an aversion to the Alliance for a while during my random returns to World of Warcraft. I ended up mostly playing Horde because of the peace-loving Thrall. Well, that was before he became the Green Messiah, but that's a Blizzard writing mistake we will get to another day. I wanted to know why Varian was such a jerk, and despite going through the game, I couldn't find a reason. And do you know why that was? It's because it was in the comics. Yes, Blizzard made supplementary material pertinent from knowing a main character's backstory and understanding why he was the way he was. Rather than actually developing him within the games like Jaina, Arthas, Thrall, or Sylvanas, we have to read a comic book in order to understand why some vital part of the game is the way that it is. Nothing against comic books here, but shouldn't it be important to tell this character's backstory in the game as well? Just so people who didn't go out of their way to follow a comic series can at least have a basic understanding of a character that's in a game. Yes, other characters are expanded upon as well, but that's the key word, expanded. They were already present in the games. There came small references to it much later on, but it didn't go into the same detail that the comics went into, which actually showed heavy character development and growth. It was just a poor decision, one that turned a lot of people off the Alliance completely, which is a shame because both the Horde and the Alliance have their pros and cons. Varian did end up developing throughout later expansions, eventually becoming a king that the humans of the Alliance could be proud of. Blizzard started to integrate him more into this story, like sending him to the human starting zone during Cataclysm to help recruit the player, and it became easier to actually see who he was as a character. I started liking him after the Mist of Pandaria cutscene, where he doesn't outright attack Vol'jin, the new war chief of the Horde, and instead just gives him a firm and completely justified warning that Vol'jin needed to keep the Horde in check or the Alliance would go at full war again. It was a moment where he refused to fight despite his past history with the Horde, and despite everything that they had just done under the rule of Garrosh that made me respect him. Even if there was a little too much focus on him, he had become a character in his own right, well developed and well realized. I wish I could say the same for all of the current leaders in World of Warcraft. Ah, Titus. The gaming community's favorite punching bag. What are we gonna do with you? Final Fantasy X is the first Final Fantasy game that I played, and I'll admit, I wasn't the nicest to Titus. I called him a vapid pretty boy who only cared about sports. It was a knee-jerk reaction that I'm not very proud of, but I chalk it up to the fact that when I first played it, I was still a teenager in high school, so the type of shallow guy who only cared about himself and the sports he plays was still very ingrained in my mind, and I automatically associated him with that. Luckily, I didn't let it sour my experience with the game as a whole, and I actually grew to like Titus as time went on. I can't deny the criticisms of him being obnoxious and a bit of a jerk, but honestly, what teenage boy wouldn't be that way after being sucked into a future world where everything he knew no longer existed? Yes, he still makes dumb comments. Yes, he still can be grating sometimes. And yes, that laugh scene is the worst. But to me, Titus is incredibly endearing. He truly ended up caring about the world he landed in, as well as the people that surrounded him. His love story with Yuna was engaging, and while not impeccably written by any stretch of the imagination, you know what it reminded me of? A romance novel. It's not nearly as good as Pride and Prejudice or Remains of the Day, but it had just the right balance of cheesy dialogue and genuine heart invested in it. It was the type of romance novel that I'd actually read. Titus is a character that I made a snap judgment on at the time of playing, but I grew really invested in him later on. He was a bit on the shallow side, and he was whiny, but the lengths he was willing to go for his new friends, as well as his new love, was enough to push me into liking him. Now, if only I could get the rest of the video game community to feel similarly. If there is one issue I have in Western RPGs, it's when characters disapprove of my actions for seemingly no apparent reason. And for me, that was the case with Morrigan from the Dragon Age series. Morrigan doesn't exactly make a great first impression, and makes sure to insult both you and Alistair when you first meet her. Yes, she joins you later on, but not out of her own volition, and she's not happy with you for quite a while. She's one of those characters that's designed to be difficult, and she rubbed me the wrong way when I first played Dragon Age Origins. With every move I made and every action I took, it was Morrigan disapproves of this, and Morrigan disapproves of that. I just left her out of my party to go adventuring without someone disapproving of my actions every 5 minutes. I had grown to hate her incessant naysaying to the point where I left her out of several main missions just so I didn't have to hear her yell at me about them. However, after a while, Morrigan and her nature began to grow on me, and I decided to befriend this Witch of the Wilds. Her backstory is great in my opinion, and the tentative friendship she can develop with the Warden warms my heart since she's never been friends with anyone before, and she's learning just what that means. From befriending her, you can actually figure out how to get her approval, which makes the game go far more smoothly overall. Not only that, but she's also an incredibly powerful mage that gives the player just the right amount of devastating attack power for the toughest bosses. I can't imagine the Broodmother fight without her in my party. She's the type of character that you have to work at getting her to like you, and she has to work at getting you to like her, which creates one of the more realistic relationships throughout the game. I made a judgment about Morrigan because nothing I did seemed right, but I came to find out that she was just a pragmatic young woman with a different approach than I had, but with equally strong principles. The type of person I was more than happy to have stand behind me when facing the Archdemon. Back when I first played BioShock, I became immediately enthralled by its world. But I was less than pleased with one of the founders of Rapture, Andrew Ryan. I listened to all the audio logs, trying to piece together just how he ran his city, and I just didn't get the appeal of the character as a whole. Even as a bad guy, I just didn't like him, and the more audio logs I found, the more I grew to hate him. I thought his philosophy just didn't make any sense in practice, and I wondered just why people followed it so eagerly. The more I thought about him, the more vexing he became, until I just had to learn more about this fellow. Through my research, I learned that Ayn Rand was who Andrew Ryan was based on, and his actions were based around her philosophy of objectivism, something I hadn't heard of prior to this. So, I decided to look into it. I tried asking around about the philosophy, and most of my associates, be they professor, friends, or family members, either didn't know anything about it, didn't remember it, or were so intensely for or against it that I couldn't get a straight answer. I eventually decided to read up on it myself, doing extensive research into it, and I saw where Andrew Ryan was coming from and how the game creators designed him, and just how brilliant this character was. For a brief definition, here's what the Atlas Society, a group dedicated to educating the public about Ayn Rand and her work, defines objectivism as. Objectivism is the philosophy of rational idealism founded by Ayn Rand. In novels such as The Fountainhead and Atlas Shrugged, Rand dramatized her ideal man, the producer who lives by his own effort and does not give or receive the undeserved, who honors achievement and rejects envy. Rand laid out the details of her worldview in non-fiction books such as The Virtue of Selfishness and Capitalism, the Unknown Ideal. While it's not a philosophy I particularly subscribe to, I had learned just what Andrew Ryan was all about. Andrew Ryan was a literal embodiment of Ayn Rand's work, and had actually worked out her ideal society, managing to make it function normally for several years before it collapsed. He produced things by the sweat of his own brow, such as Rapture and his vast fortune, and never gave or received anything if he didn't think he deserved it. All blocks had fallen into place, and I finally understood just who or what Andrew Ryan was. An immoral businessman who didn't think about anyone's needs above his own, one who wanted to better the world by his own hard work and for others to take pride in the work that they did, rather than allow the government to control it. He hated socialism and communism, so he built his own society around what he believed was the morally right thing to do, his actions being similar to the characters in Rand's books. He was Ayn Rand's ideal man. Despite any feelings I have about objectivism as a philosophy, I can't imagine any other man building the city beneath the sea better than Andrew Ryan. Sybil Rez wasn't a character I expected to like. I downright despised her and the rest of the Camerata for their role in the events of the game Transistor. Not that they weren't interesting characters, of course, and the rest of the group ended up growing on me after a while, but Sybil, she took a little longer. It was in part due to her relationship with Red, which I found to be unnerving during my first playthrough. From my perspective, it seemed that Red's past with Sybil was a relationship between a manager and their client, to which Sybil grew obsessed and caused the events of the game. I thought that Sybil had been previously using Red just to excel in the social world, since she had been a socialite and that was basically her job. Transistor deliberately paints Sybil in a negative light at first, and throughout the boss fight. I admit I wasn't paying attention to what process Sybil was saying as much as I was paying attention to what song Red was singing. For those of you who haven't heard it, the song is called Circles. Here's a brief clip.
Maybe you're looking for someone to blame, fighting for air while you circle the drain.
From that alone, I assumed that Red was in some sort of toxic relationship with Sybil, and I couldn't blame her for harboring any animosity towards her, and I empathized with Red. After all, the game did put me in her point of view completely, and up until that point we had heard things exclusively from her and her lover's perspective. It wasn't until I replayed it and looked at just what Sybil was saying during her boss fight that I realized that I might have viewed things entirely from Red's perspective, rather than through mine. When I noticed that, I felt a twinge of guilt for writing her off so quickly, and for not listening to her side of the story, which was incredibly short-sighted of me considering how I like to get both sides of a story when it comes to conflicts. Not only was I able to learn about who Sybil was from the recently unlocked files I had on her, but I was able to decipher that Sybil never intended to hurt Red. Well, not initially. The story goes that the two had been incredibly close, like best friends level of close, possibly unrequited love depending on how you view it. And while originally Sybil was just using Red to maintain her place on the social ladder, it grew to be something more as time went on. Then, when Red began to distance herself, Sybil grew incredibly jealous and blamed it on Red's newfound lover turning her into an enemy. So, she had the rest of the Camerata target Red, knowing that she'd be with him and she'd be able to get him out of the way and have Red all to herself again. When you find her later on in the game, she's humming one of Red's songs, and then, in the third stage of the boss fight, she's singing Circles, the song that Red sang earlier about Sybil, which is on the extended version of the soundtrack, showing that Sybil felt very similarly about Red.
Maybe you're looking for someone to blame, fighting for air while you circle the drain.
It's disturbing, yes, but it's part of what made her a good character, a great villainous character, in fact. She's my favorite character from the villainous group the Camerata, and she's one of my favorites in Transistor as a whole. Even with her being a villain in mind, I do feel sympathy for Sybil. When you encounter her in-game, she's already gone mad from being slowly processed. She's not in control of her actions when she attacks you, but you can make out that she does regret what she's done, and she does honestly care for Red, which is something that did not register to me the first time I played. I don't think Sybil's actions are justifiable, but I don't think she deserved the fate that she was dealt. But at least she finally got what she wanted. She got to be with Red. And there you have it. The characters on this list aren't the first I've had misconceptions about, and they certainly won't be the last. Feeling negative emotions toward a character is completely natural. They might even be written in such a way to make you hate them. But it's always important to understand why you harbor those feelings towards them. You never know when a character may be getting some unwarranted hate because of lack of research, your own personal feelings on something trivial, errors on the creator's part, or because they were just misunderstood in their intentions. Recognizing these things encourages personal growth, and who knows, there might be a hated character of yours that you may grow to like if given the proper chance.